My name is Yui. Last year I was applying for core training. I need to sit the MSRA, and I didn't realize there was much free material out there on the web, so I got into contact with Mind the Bleep. Um, to try and give some more information for everyone on how to approach this exam that's used for lots of different specialties, but in various ways of the application process, just to try and demystify everything. So we had a few sessions and we actually created a WhatsApp group chat for those who haven't joined, just as a platform as well to support each other. And I've seen everyone's been very active on it with their oral applications, which makes me very happy. And then hopefully you've had your questions answered. Initially, earlier on, Dan was quite an active member of the WhatsApp group chat because he was flying for GP training for the winter term. Um, and he shared some really good insights after his exam itself and on Reddit. And he's also successfully got into GP training, so congratulations, Dan. Because he was so helpful, we got in touch with him whether he could do a session just to talk us through how he approached the MSRA and did so well in it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to him. And yes, this session will be recorded on YouTube and on Medal for those who want to have a relook. But over to you, Dan.
Oh my God, on YouTube as well. Okay, thank you very much, Yui, for organizing the event and inviting me and introducing me. So I'll introduce myself for everyone who most probably do not know me. My name is Dan. So I've actually studied medicine initially I'll tell you a bit about myself. I studied medicine initially in Romania. And at a certain point, I decided that I want to have a bit more, and I've done the USMLE, the United States Medicine License exam, and I got really good scores as well. And then I moved to Germany, and before practicing medicine there, I started coaching and teaching and advising for Ambos. That's a professional company and an online platform for teaching for the USMLE. So I've done that for about 1 year. Then I practiced in Germany for 2 years. Then I moved to the UK about 7 months ago, 8 months ago, and started studying for the MSRA about 3 months before the exam. Then I took it. Until then, I was in Surrey, in Frimley Park Hospital, doing a trust grade job. And and I took the MSRA, and I got a really, I got place 73 out of the 3,200 candidates that took the exam. And then you invited me to speak here, and I'm here to share with you some of what I think is basically a recipe on how to succeed in those exams, because I think a lot of time those exams, they don't really translate into being a good doctor. That the fact that you can take the exam doesn't necessarily mean that the fact that you got a high score doesn't necessarily mean that you are good at your job, and it's also vice versa. So the fact that you're a very good doctor or an excellent doctor doesn't mean that you can take exams really easily, and there's kind of a way to crack those exams down and break them down in order to be able to just really score high in them. Doesn't matter what you do as long as you follow the recipe, or at least that's the way that I do them, and it's always successful. Doesn't matter which exam is in front of me, and that's what I want to share with you today. And the way that I do it is less PowerPoint presentation. That's something that specifically does not function well for me. I love to do mind maps, so I've done a mind map, and then I'm just gonna go with you through the mind map and take you through the different points and explain them to you. I'm gonna do it relatively fast, not slow, because there's so much material to cover, and then afterwards we're gonna have a Q&A session, so you can ask me to elaborate on the points that you find much more important, or that you want to have more information regarding them. So without further ado, let's do that. Something which is worth mentioning is that when I share with you the presentation or the mind map, I actually cannot see this screen. It's impossible for me. So I won't know what you're writing. That's going to be for about 25, 30 minutes, I guess. I'll try to go as fast as possible. And Yui, if you see that there's any technical problems, if there's any issue, then you can just, pop on and let me know. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to share our screen. Do that. Okay. Fine. Yui, can you just let me know that everybody sees the mind?
You're ready.
Okay, fine. So people can see it. Fantastic. Okay, so we have two branches here. We have the clinical question scenario. So those questions, and that's going to be the main part of my conversation or my talk, and that's because the majority of what can be said is related to that topic. And the small part, the small branch, which is, as you can see, vastly smaller than the other one, is the SJT, and that's because there's honestly not too much to talk about it, not at least in the way of presentation, but we'll get to that, and then we can elaborate in Q&A if you need anything else there as well. So regarding the clinical questions, first of all, I think let's touch the resources, which is the part that people, they struggle the most because there's so many resources out there. So for the clinical questions, I found Past Medicine the best by far and wide. So Past Medicine, um, not only the body of knowledge really corresponded to the exam, or corresponded the most to the exam, but also the style of writing, the way they wrote the questions was very familiar with the exam itself. Then I've also done eMedica, which I personally wouldn't recommend. I didn't like the way that the questions were built there, and even more importantly, I didn't like the explanations. And then I also took I've done the MSRA official study material, which was honestly nothing like the real exam, and it was a bit of a surprise for me to study from the official MSRA material, the one that they publish, and then coming to the exam, and on the exam day to see that it's not even, that there's no correlation. It was just vastly different from one another. So when it comes to the resources, I would say Past Medicine. There's also MCQ Bank. So MCQ Bank, the challenge with them is the layout. So the way that it is actually visualized, the way that not the way that they wrote the questions, but the explanations are out there in a way which is not really easy to follow or to access again when you want to repeat the explanations. So if you are going to do only one resource or focus on one resource, I would definitely say Past Medicine. That's the best one. And then if you think that you have gained enough knowledge in Past Medicine and you just want to work on your test taking skills, you just want to see if you can take those questions again in another format, and the same information being questioned in another way, then you can go to the MCQ bank. So again, in order to build up kind of a branch, or flow chart, then Past Medicine, and after Past Medicine, you go to the MCQ bank. And I don't think you need to do more than that in order to score really high and then get also, the place that you wish to go to in your whatever training that you wish to do. So that was about the resources. Let's break down the studying process. So there's 2 points that are very important to make here. There's the body of knowledge and there's the test taking skills. And those two are very different from each other, and they are complementary, but they're not the same. They are very different from each other, and I cannot stress it enough. The body of knowledge is the information that you have when you finish reading, your resources, and when you've done all of the questions, and the information that you have in your brain. And test taking skills is how you wield, how you use, how you twist and bend the information to fit the question that they ask you. And it's important to remember or to realize, to understand that those exams like the MSRA and also the USMLE, they're the same in that sense that the reason why they do them is not in order to test necessarily your body of knowledge, or it is, but they kind of come from they want to already imagine that you have the body of knowledge, you have the information, you understood it, but then they want to see that you can apply it on a real life scenario, which would be a medical case, and that's the clinical scenarios. And therefore they write the questions which have the same information, let's say for example COPD information, they write it in so many different ways in order to see if you can actually recognize the same information in various forms and shapes. So that would be the test taking skills. And it's important again to realize that those two are different, and at a certain point, even if you have 100% of the information, the knowledge in your brain, you wouldn't be able to score above average if you don't know how to take the exam, if you don't know how to break up the question. That being said, let's continue with elaborating on each one of them. Regarding the body of knowledge, you have, sorry, there's a lot of booms outside of my window for some reason. I hope that you can't hear them. Regarding the body of knowledge, you have pest medicine, and I also use the Ambos. That's the company where I used to be an employee, and they have a fantastic kind of summarizations of every disease. And a lot of time, pest medicine wasn't enough for me, and then I just used Ambos as a complementary resource to just get a better kind of understanding of what is happening there and have it very well organized. But you can use whichever resources are functioning for you. Now you need to make sure that you understand the information fully, and that's important because again, they're not gonna. So some questions are gonna be pure knowledge, but a lot of them are gonna be the concept that stands behind it, right? So again, if we go to the example of COPD, they want to understand what is restrictive events, obstructive respiratory disease, right? They want to know that you understand what's the difference between them, and they're going to ask you about it in various ways, and therefore you need to understand the knowledge there, not only to memorize it, because if you only memorize it, you wouldn't be able to, again, bend it, twist it, use it, wield it to your needs when you face the question that is in front of you. So it's not enough to memorize questions. It's important to understand it's important to understand what stands behind the information that you're reading. And I think that's I wouldn't say a mistake, but it's kind of this default mode that we have of, oh, I know how to memorize it, it's fine now. No, you need to understand what stands behind it. You need to really fully grasp the knowledge. Now, memorization, very important in this exam, especially when it comes to all of those vaccinations, or you have kind of flow charts of what do you do at which stage regarding treatments and so on. For example, Crohn's disease, they would ask you, what do you do now that the patient didn't react or didn't respond to ABC treatment? What's D? Or that would come that would come up a lot when you do not only COPD but asthma. In asthma, they ask it a lot. What's the next stage of treatment? And you know that those parts, or blood pressure, for example, they would ask you what is the target of the blood pressure in this or that in various ways. And it's extremely important to understand that even though it's very painful to understand or to memorize those stuff, because you just have a table and it's very boring to memorize it. But those are free questions. Those are the easiest questions that you're actually gonna get in the exam. So once you have, for example, the blood pressure targets, and you take it and you memorize it and you write it on the paper again and again until you can take it, and shoot it directly whenever they ask you about it. Next time we're going to see this question about the blood pressure target, you're going to be able to answer it very easily and very fast. And those are free questions. So it's very important to understand, okay, this is a table that is standing in front of me. I really don't want to memorize it. Anyhow, I'm going to forget it. But, don't hate the players, hate the game. And this is the game. You need to memorize those stuff. And that's basically also 50% of those clinical scenarios. It's just memorization. And the other 50% would be to understand the information fully. Don't memorize everything. Just memorize what is high yield. So, for example, if you have HACUM, or if you have any, I don't know, a heart disease, cardiological problem, then probably memorizing S2. In S2, you hear this crescendo systolic murmur is not going to be the thing that's going to give you the exam. There's a lot of other information there that's going to be more important. There's a lot of information that's going to give you the answer itself, so you don't have to memorize all of the smallest details that you don't actually think going to give you the question. You need to see the pattern of the question that they give you, and there is a pattern always, and they focus on certain topics that will come in the exam much more often than the others. And then afterwards, so going back, we have the body of knowledge, we understood it fully, then we memorize the high yield topics. And then we have the repetition. The repetition you can do however you want to do it. I use flashcards, I use Anki. I use them since I'm in the age of 21. When I entered med school, I started using Anki, and that works fantastic for me. And the thing with repetition is that I wouldn't call it a mistake, but it's kind of a waste of resources, is that people have a topic, again, let's say COPD, and then they know that they get about 30% of the questions related to COPD incorrectly. So they would go back and study the entire topic of COPD or Crohn's disease or whatever you want, whatever you have. And the best way to do it would actually, already on the first go, after you understood the topic properly and you still got the question incorrectly, you stop, you reflect upon it, you understand why you got it incorrectly, and you put it either on a piece of paper or on a document, whatever, or you put it on your Anki flashcards. And then when you finish the entire preparation, you can go on and repeat it. And in this way, you're going to use very little time in order to repeat a very high percentage of questions or information that you would constantly get incorrect, and then you would get it correctly. So the way that I used to teach my student, or the way that I study myself, is that you do that, and then you see that from answering 65 to 70% correct questions, you get to that stage of repetition, which is about 2 weeks before the exams. And then all of a sudden, after you finish the repetition, again, I used Anki flashcards, you start answering 90-95% correctly, because that was that small bit of information that you would never answer correctly, and you could only focus on that without going to the entire topic. So that's a massive plus. Okay, that being talked upon, we'll go to the test taking skills. So with test taking skills is a bit more vague. It's more difficult to discuss it. What you need to do there is to ask yourself, what do they actually want from me? Why did they ask this question in this manner? So I remember in the exam day, I got a question of a person with probably PE, so pulmonary embolism, and they wanted to ask, what's the next thing that you need to do? And actually all the answers were correct. You know, it was ECG, it was D-dimer, it was a CT, a PA, it was whatever you want. And the correct answer, I believe at least, was just measuring blood pressure to see that it's not decompensating and entering, hypotensive shock due to the PE. And why I'm telling you this is to understand that in this question, they knew that I'm having the information. You finished your FY1, you're in FY2, you're FY3, you're taking this exam, and they know that you already know what to do, but they want to see that you understand what's the best next action to take. And in this case, it would see that is not actually decompensating acutely and that you need to treat it right now. And that's, a life-saving thing that you need to do. You'll see also in past medicine, they really play on this topic when they give you people that have cardiac issues, for example, arrhythmias, and then you would have 5 different options to choose from what is the correct answer. And the correct answer would be a lot of time, do now cardioversion, give him now shocks because he's becoming hypotensive. And they give you a massive stem of a question. They try to confuse you. But if you understand what they really want from you, then you can answer it without going throughout all of this faff. You can just kind of dissect through this thickness of information that they give you. You're not distracted, and you can answer it very correctly, very fast, and very precise. So I would recommend, maybe not at the beginning, but kind of, you're already at the 50% of your preparation, you've done half of past medicine or whatever question bank that you choose to use. And then when you start getting questions incorrectly, after you've done already 50% of them, start asking yourself with every question which is incorrect, why? And then if you didn't have that information, then memorize it. If you didn't understand it because obstructive and restrictive, then understand it, and so on and so forth. It could also be just that the presentation, you were not familiar with it. It could be that they give you, a very good example would be that they play on skin cancers, and they give you a presentation of a cancer that you already know, but you didn't know that it can present in this specific way, that, if it's a white skin cancer, or it's the color of your skin, it can also be melanoma, even though you would imagine that it should be more brownish, blackish, whatever. It doesn't matter even if I'm incorrect on this one, but that's the bottom line, that you need to understand why you got it incorrect, and then to actually address that. The second thing is time management. You need to read very fast, and that's something that you can practice. That's something that you can actually work upon. A lot of people, even native English speakers or not native English speakers, they just read the questions relatively slowly. And the way to practice on that is just to calculate how much time you would have in the real exam, and then to put it upon your questions and then do them. And I think with the MSRA, you have, for the clinical questions, you have less than 1 minute per question. You have like 0.0 70 seconds, or I can't remember anymore, but I would just put it on a timer, and then I would do the questions as if I'm under time restrictions, and via that you practice reading faster, and you also practice your brain into scanning the question and not necessarily reading all the information, and you can filter out all the information which is unnecessarily. That being said, with time you would also start understanding which topics and which questions you do need to read fully, because you already know that they set traps there and you need to read the entire topic, and which questions are very specific or very straightforward, very direct, and you can just directly jump into the answer. Now, when we get to the point of actually choosing which answer is correct, I have specifically a theory or a method which I'm using. It's called, or I coined it as, the hit or exclusion process, in which you read the question, they ask you something. Either you already know the answer and then just hit it. You don't even need to search for it. You already know what's going to be the answer, and then just look for what corresponds with the answer, or you don't know what's the answer. And if you don't know what's the answer, then you're going to start doing an exclusion process in which you need to stay very calm, because it's very easy to not be calm in it. And then through that place of calmness, understand why this and this and this is incorrect. So for example, if we go back to the question with the PE, I didn't know which answer is correct, right, with the pulmonary embolism, because all of them were correct, like doing ECG, D dimers, CTPA, everything there is correct, ABG, whatever you want. But excluding all of those with what is the most appropriate next step to do in order to ensure that I conduct a safe, very productive clinical assessment of the patient, I understood that it's best to do blood pressure. And that would be, for example, again, with if we take COPD, just to give another example, they could ask you, what's the antibiotic that you would probably use in this scenario? And then they would give you a list of antibiotics. And let's say that you don't really know which antibiotic is the best for COPD, because it also varies, local trust or whatever. And then you think, okay, they wanted you to use macrolide or whatever, or vancomycin, I don't know. And you can think, wait, I know that the bacteria which is most prominent with COPD is X. And I know that this antibiotic is not going to be effective for this bacteria, and therefore you can exclude it. And by this, you usually get very fast to already two options, and then you need to choose between those two options. And then even if you don't know which one of them is the correct one, you already created a scenario where you have 50-50. So there's a very high possibility and probability that you would get the answer correct. Okay, I hope that was clear. Talking about Anki maybe another time. That's a very big topic, and we can do a webinar just for that. But there's a different ways that you can do. There's a different cards. There's different flashcards that correspond to different topics. So, for example, for the pure memorization, for the principal concepts, and so on. Right. We talked already about this one, B1 with the questions maker. So basically that was the test taking skills, and that correspond to everything which we already talked about. Something that I cannot emphasize enough is the pre-test week or general preparation. And that's something that I saw that specifically in the UK, for some reason people don't really emphasize, and in the USA I know that they really do. It's a cultural thing there, and I think that it's specifically in this scenario it's very appropriate to do. You need to have a dedicated period, and that would be a time frame in which you can just sit and study for the exam without being interrupted, because there's actually a scientific terminology for that, because they studied how to study for exams, and I don't remember it right now, but it's the power of being in the flow. If we say it in lay terms and not scientific terminology, the power of being in the flow with the exam. There is something about being able to sit for 1 week, 2 weeks before the exam, and every day do about 8 hours, 12 hours, how much you want to do, how much you can do. And this compiles and kind of build upon each other in your skills in a manner that you cannot do if you break your preparation to just 3 hours a day. So of course, before the exam, if you start studying 1 month, 2 months, 3 months before the exam, that's the way you do it. You do every day 2-3 hours, and then at the weekends you study more. But before the exam itself, I would highly recommend you to try to organize as much free time as possible. The way that I managed to do it was about 1.5 weeks before the exam. And then I had 4 night shifts, and then I had 5 more days. And you kind of culminate all of your test taking skills, and you sharpen and hone them in that time. And you also take all of the body of knowledge and and the memorization, and you manage to squeeze it in your brain in a way that you would be able to access it much more easily in the test day, because you just saw it recently in a way and manner that is just not accessible to the human brain if you have mastered this topic 4 weeks ago, but that was a singular topic, and you mastered another topic, let's say 3 weeks ago. But if you kind of refresh those topics adjacent to each other in your brain, while you see it in real life, there really a synapse between all of the topics, and they combine. And then doesn't matter which question they give you in a random order, doesn't matter what's the topic, you're able very fast to deduct what's the topic, what do they ask me, and what do they want me to answer. And this just doesn't come so easily if you don't have this pre-dedicated period, because then it's kind of scattered in your brain in various areas, and it takes a lot of time to access that information, time that you really don't have in the exam. Another very small thing that I want to talk about is the organization. Be meticulous about it. A lot of people don't do it, and it's important to do it. It's the same as if you're a gym person and you go to the gym, you're not just going to train something. You're going to have a plan, you're going to have a build up, you're going to have exact numbers. And it's the same with the exam. Once you start and you're already 1-2 weeks into your exam, you're going to see exactly how much time you need in order to cover all of the topics, because you have already a rhythm, and you know how many topics and how many body of knowledge and questions and memorization and flashcards you can do in one day, where you also have your shift, or on your weekend. And you would be able to roughly build a flow chart or a schedule for how much time it would take you to do everything. And with that, you can actually organize it. So when you look at my preparation, and I don't have it anymore, so I cannot show you, about 2 months before my exam, I've built exactly how many questions I have in past medicine, and how many questions I want to do in other Q banks, and how many questions, topics I really want to repeat, and flashcards and so on. And I had a chart of what I need to cover every single day in order to get to the test day already covering everything, and that plus a buffer of 2-3 days in order to be able to fit in all of those unexpected scenarios, like you got sick, you were on call for a long time, and the day afterwards you didn't manage to study, and so on. Right. Just a small quirk of mine is talking about mindfulness in those presentation. I think that, well, at least for me, it functions excellently. One of the reasons that I believe that I do well in exams is that I practice mindfulness before the exam. I practice it generally, but when I'm in this preparation dedicated time, I actually practice mindfulness much more. And this gives me the ability in the exam day to be one with the exam. As much as it sounds dramatic, this is the reality of it. I managed to come to the exam and sit it. And while I do the exam, I see how my emotions are rising, and I'm able to let them go. So for example, the exam starts with the SJT. And when I started doing this, I was, 10 questions into the exam. I was just sitting there and I was thinking, oh my God, I just have no idea what happens here. I don't know what to do. This exam is going to be rubbish. It's going to be a disaster. What's going to be the placement that I'm going to get in round 2? There's already not enough places anyhow. And this was really in my head in the exam while it's under time restrictions. And that's a very unhealthy thing to have. And then through that mindfulness quality that I had on that moment, I managed to, again, being a bit dramatic, hijack my brain and say, well, it doesn't really matter what you feel right now. You need to do the exam and you have only one go at it. Or that's how I thought it. When I started the exam, you actually have more goes in the MSRA. You can do it as many times as you want. But I didn't want to do it. I wanted to pass it at one go, and I wanted to do it then and there, and then get a placement. And I said to myself, it doesn't matter what you have in your mind. The future doesn't matter. The past doesn't matter. Just be now and here. And then I really managed to let it go and just do the exam. And I think it's something that really happens to a lot of people. They get very stressed in the exam itself. Another thing that I want to say regarding the dedicated time, and that's something that I really love people. I really love to see people do that, because the results they speak for themselves. A few days before the exam, start doing mock exams, right? So past medicine have them built in, but sometimes, like I've done also a mock exam of my own accord with MCQ Bank and the SJT also from the MCQ Bank. So what happened is that about 7 days before the exam, I wake up on the same time that I wake up in the exam itself, in the exam day. I drink the same amount of coffee, I eat the same food, and I have exactly the same routine in order to be able to let my body know this is what's going to happen in the exam day. And then you are able to tweak your own physique and your own mind and your own rhythm to how it would be in the exam itself. And by optimizing it, you do get extra points because you're there and your body knows exactly what to do. You don't need to go to the toilet. You don't need to drink more coffee. You don't need to do anything else. You can just focus on the exam. And that's because you already managed to let your body know this is how it's going to be. And the mock exams are very important because they would give your body and your brain the ability to go through the exam before the exam itself under the same conditions, and to be able to simulate that in a manner that would make you understand what you need to do in order to pass it with success, right? Or with optimization and a better score. Okay, so that's the pre-test week and the mock exam. Let's go to the SJT. Right, there's not a lot to say about the SJT. It's really just doing as many questions as possible and try to get as much as possible from them. So let's start with the resources as usual. I've done the practice questions from the UK Foundation Program website. I'm not really sure if I can recommend it. It was definitely not bad, but at the same time, it wasn't excellent. I've done the past medicine one and I really didn't like it. I felt they were just inconsistent. I've done the MCQ, all of them, and I can highly recommend them. I think they're very good, and it could really give me this insight to what's going to be in the exam and how they want me to think. I've done the e-Medica. Also, I didn't like them, and the official MSRA study material, I've done them as well, and I found them to be, again, like UK Foundation Program, kind of, yeah, it's hitting the spot, but it doesn't give me what I need in order to really progress in this exam. Talking about the technique, the easiest way to do it is to understand that they're gonna give you answers or scenarios that are not realistic. They're gonna give you answers that are not correct, and they know it. They don't care about the fact that the answers are not correct. They want you to grade those answers according to what is the most correct one, which concept topple the other one. So for example, they want you to know, or they want you to show that the concept of patient safety is more important than your own well-being. And then they want you to show that the well-being is more important than helping your colleagues. Or it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that there's a line of concept, right? And they always repeat each other. Like they would be safety, doing good medicine, doing safe medicine, patient's autonomy, the ability of patients to decide whatever treatment they want to have, being a good colleague, and so on and so forth. And they would want you to kind of understand which one of them is going to come above the other. And that's the way to think about it, not which one is correct and incorrect, because many times you're going to have questions with answers that none of them is correct, really. You wouldn't do it in real life. But they want to see that you understand what concept is more important than the other, and in which cases they switch. So there are scenarios in the MSRA where a concept like patient safety would switch and your well-being would be a more important concept. And those scenarios are very clearly outlined, but they don't say it when you read the explanation, but it is important to be aware so you can build your own algorithm and flowchart. Now, the easiest way to do it is to first of all understand which one is the most correct. That's usually, or 95% of the time, very clear which one of them is the most correct one. And it's 90-80% clear which one of them is the least appropriate. And then you start need to play in the middle. And you don't need to get all of them correct in order to get most of the points. You just need to get the first one, the last one, and some in the middle. Now, the way that I went about with those exams, with those questions, to ask me, what do they want me to be? And so when I started, I got actually a very low score in those questions, and that's also expectable as a person who doesn't come from the UK, and I didn't practice in the UK before. And then I went to Reddit, like all of us, and people told me there, you need to imagine that the NHS is the perfect universe, and you're a team player, and you need to give your absolute utmost energy and everything and whatever in order to be in the NHS. And that got me more points, but still it wasn't enough. And then I understood that the exam doesn't really want you to answer that. The exam wants you to imagine that we are living in this harmonious, amazing environment in which your well-being and the NHS come together and they feed upon each other. So the way that I imagined coming to the question was, what would be the optimal scenario in an optimal universe, in an amazing, without fault, no mistakes NHS? How would I function there? And that also means that your well-being is on the top priority of the list. So a lot of time you would see there's a question of, you didn't manage to do this, but you have a dinner with your fiance. What do you do? Because the other doctor didn't come to the handover. And then you need to think, well, they don't really want me to sacrifice everything for it. They just want me to do it in a safe manner so I can continue to live my life, because that's also important. So kind of combining those and then understanding that they feed upon each other in this exam in the way that they see it, that would be probably the correct answer. And that's about it. Okay, so let's go here and stop sharing. Right. Okay, I hope that was clear. I hope it was helpful. And now I guess we get to the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Dan. Are you able to see we've got quite a lot of questions coming in? Do you just want to start going through them? Happy to chip in. And I just to say, regarding question banks, past events and e-medic are definitely ones that we use, but we're not endorsing any because we're impartial. So there are other questions, as that's Dan's experience, but there are other available resources as well.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot of questions. Okay.
First one, where can we find the official past papers? Also, how long are the question stems in the clinical section?
Okay. So the official papers, you get them when you sign up for the exam. And then they would be on the ORIEL, or you can also find them if you just write official MSRA information or a question bank in the official MSRA questions on Google, and then you have them. The question banks, the question stems were actually very short. In the real exam, it was much shorter than past medicine. It wasn't one sentence like many people told me it would be. It was about 2 to 3 sentences every question.
I agree with Dan, but it also depends on the type of question. So there are questions where they give you a list of conditions, and that list of conditions they ask multiple times regarding, for instance, it'll be a case of different type of skin rashes, and then they'll describe which one it is. But like they are very brief, like Dan said, and then some will be a bit longer than others.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, for sure. There are some questions that are much longer, but then they would ask the same, they would put the same stem, but different question 3-4 times. different questions, but correlating to the same stem. Yeah.
Good question. Are there images or ECGs in the exam? Not from my memory. What was your experience, Dan?
No, nothing. I didn't see anything there. No, there were not any images. I don't remember seeing anything.
I think from my memory reading the blueprint last year, it could possibly be, but doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have it. But not that we're aware, and we're not allowed to tell you exactly what's in the questions. But I guess we can just briefly say what our experience was. Karen, this is quite a long one, so briefly, how long did you spend preparing for the exam? I almost covered it all in terms of the past medicine question bank, but I feel I need to go back through all the topics to refresh and consolidate. With 2 months be a good period to consolidate the knowledge I've done, and yeah. How
Okay.
long did you spend?
Right, so I studied about 3 months for the exam, while having full-blown rota and doing nights and everything and weekends. I do think it's enough time, especially if you're already done past medicine. Probably, again, we come back to the topic of, if we would do flashcards, or if you would kind of take that information that you're not good at while you did the first pass and then put it somewhere that you can come back to, this wouldn't take you a lot of time to repeat it and then to have this repetition. That being said, 2 months is a long time if you've already finished past medicine, so you're definitely in an excellent position to go very quickly through the topics that you feel that you need to repeat it the most, and then do the document or the flashcards that you want, whatever you use, in order to repeat those topics. And then, like I said and presented before, understand why you need to repeat them. If it's about specific topics, in subtopics in that topic, and that kind of double down on that thing and understand it or memorize it. Again, you would see it a lot with blood pressure, that you could do blood pressure questions, thousands of them, and you just would never get them correct, or you would get only 25% of them correct. But the moment that you memorize the table with the blood pressure target, you just can't get it wrong anymore. You have to get it right. You have to succeed. And that would be the bottom line.
How many times did you do past med, Dan? And did you use knowledge tutor?
I've only done it once. I'm not a believer in doing it more than once. I don't think it's effective. I don't think it makes any sense. I think that if you've done it once already, then you're supposed to know the information. And if you don't know it, then you need to put it on again, flashcards or whatever. And the most important thing is that once you do a question bank more than one time, then you lost this aspect of test taking skills. And in that sense, it's much better to do 2 question banks once you finished one of them, in order to be able to see the question in a different way, this topic. Because if you repeat it, then you kind of fall back into this, oh, I know it, I click it, and it's biased. You don't necessarily know this topic. If you've done the question twice, even if you've done it the first time 3 months ago, you're still gonna have a vague understanding of what they want from you. And in this way, your brain gets into, I wouldn't call it lazy mode, but in this, I'm sitting, it's very comfortable. I know this question bank. I know how they ask questions. I know what they want from me. And it's very unhealthy to be in this place. It's much better to be on edge when you take those exams, and to always feel that you don't know enough, rather than be in the comfortable place. That's my personal view of it.
And then again, which is the best app for preparing for the MSRA? I feel, how would you respond to that, Dan?
Definitely a multitude of apps. I don't think that if we compare it again to the USMLE, there you would have kind of this top 2 platforms, and for sure everybody do them, and that's mostly what they do. I think when it comes to the MSRA, there's really an array of stuff that you can do, and different features would be better for you. I specifically, like I said, I use Pest Medicine, I use the Medica, I used MCQ Bank, and those were my 3 main ones. But I've also used Ambos a lot. I also used CKC for certain topics that I just wasn't sure how to go on them. So I don't think there's one best app to use. Generally speaking, I think you kind of need to find, and that's unfortunate that there's not one source that is really toppling all of them in that sense. But that's the reality of it.
Hmm. Um, Fine. Yeah, I agree. And everyone learns differently. So we are providing this as a way, I guess, like Dan said, just to give, because last year when I did it, I've not knowing anything, it feels like very much a stab in the dark. But play around them as well, because what works for us may not work for your learning method, but this is what we find useful.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting question. Which subreddit would you use apart from Doctors UK?
Okay, I have an answer for that, but just a second. Going back to the WhatsApp group, the WhatsApp group was really a lifesaver, I have to say, because on the day when the exam dates opened, I was out of the UK. I wasn't in the UK. And I really needed to have a good exam date. That's because I've done 4 night shifts before, right? So I had to have a buffer so I can repeat the information. And I entered the entire day in order to see when do they come, when do they pop up the exam dates. And at a certain point, I just said to myself, like, enough, I'm not going to do it anymore. It didn't come up. And then so I was just like at the balcony reading a book. And then at a certain point, somebody actually wrote in the WhatsApp group, guys, it's already out. And through that, I managed to get the slot of my choice. And that was really, really good for me. So the WhatsApp group was a lifesaver. Subreddit, no subreddit, no Reddit in your dedicated period. Don't enter Reddit, unless if you have questions for the MSRA, because it's just going to be a distraction. Just focus on the exam. Don't use any other subreddit or whatever. That would be my answer. I don't use any other subreddit except for Doctors UK. I don't know. I'm not aware that there are any, except for the GP ones, where I'm also a member.
Okay. Which question bank is representative for the clinical questions?
I, I found in a paradoxical way that the past medicine, even though it was written differently from the real exam, for some odd, unexplained reason, it still kind of gave me the skills to answer the questions in the real exam. The question stem and the length and the formulation, I guess it would be eMedica. Yeah.
Thank you. And what would you say are the high yield topics that we should definitely cover for the MSRA clinical topics?
Um, wow. Can't really answer that from the top of my head. You would see it in the question bank, right? Because those questions would come back again and again, especially if you do 2 question banks, then you would see that certain topics just have an overlap and they would be asked many times over. So COPD, asthma, blood pressure targets, and so on and so forth. But no, from the top of my head, there's no way I can answer that. There's a lot of high yield topic. One of them that came up just before I entered the exam, like literally there were new questions on the question bank. It was about can't remember now, but the bottom line is that like you would figure it out while you do the exam. That's fine. Like you don't need to know it beforehand, and there's no list of high yield topics, to be honest. I would go on a limb here and say that the high yield topics are the one that you lack knowledge in the most, because probably you need that knowledge in order to score those points. So the questions that you don't know would be the highest yield for you, but some topics would just repeat themselves many times over, and you would figure it out. It's not like you would see it in the question banks themselves.
In terms of proportions of questions, how many are about genetics then?
Genetics, none, like very little. I don't remember any questions about genetics. So there are many, very little, I guess. I don't remember any epigenetics or genetics or anything there.
Okay.
Do you remember any?
I think it's definitely worthwhile knowing the basics because if you think about it, it's a pool of questions that get asked, so not everyone will be answering the exact same questions when you sit the exam.
Mm,
And if that is covered, whether you have any is a different question, but I doesn't think if one person did not have any genetics questions in the past, it'll definitely not come up. Yeah, is all I can say.
Oh, I think maybe they mean the Mendelian chart, right? The one that you have X and Y and what comes out of that. Okay, those I didn't have any in my exam, but they were covered in every question bank. So I assume that they would be in the exam of many people.
Yeah. Um, Ruth, if someone is starting now, is it too late to get a good score with a regular rota schedule of daily 9 to 5?
So when is the exam would be in January, right? So you would have most of November, you have December, you have a bit of January. Well, it really depends on what you want to do, right? Like, well, what's a good score for you, and where do you want to apply to, and how fast you are in studying. Don't forget there's also the holidays coming up, and New Year's Eve and Christmas and whatnot. And how much of that are you gonna spend with your family? How much of that are you gonna spend studying? Um, Many people scored very high with two months only. I specifically needed 3 months. I'm a slow learner. I'm not a fast one. I do need more time than the others. I know that, and that's how I also computed it. In the time frame. Um, but you would only know if you start studying now. Another thing about the MSRA, don't forget that you can sit it twice and it doesn't cost any money. So you can also just study regularly and then take it once and then sit it again and then do your dedicated period and study for it more properly if you feel that you cannot get a high score. But I would recommend don't see it as black and white. Just take, for example, 2 weeks, study very properly in those 2 weeks, and then take a few hours to think: can I actually score high? Can I get a good score or not? And you would be the only one who can answer that.
I think that's a very good summary, actually. Yep. Aman, did your average performance on past medicine reflect how you perform in the real exam? I'm currently scoring 60% on average for first attempts.
Oh, that's fine. I only got 70% in my first pass, and that's again because what I've done is just you disappeared. Um, got me off balance. What I've done is going through the first pass without doing almost any repetition, and then after finishing that and having 70%, I have done all of my Anki flashcards, or whatever system functions for you. It really doesn't have to be Anki flashcards. That's just the thing that functions for me. And then I've done the repetition, and really in 10 days, I started scoring 95%. And that was because I used that system. So initially I only got 70% on the first pass, and still I got top 10% in the country. And that's fine. It doesn't reflect, as long as you have that period which is dedicated, in which you can use the information that you already gathered and put it together into one piece.
Okay. Dan, can you hear me? I don't know what's happened to my camera.
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Yeah, I'm afraid I've disappeared, but I am here. Karen, I am not currently working as I am on a career break, so I've done past medicine almost once and intend to study 10 to 12 hours per day. Would that be excessive for doing the exam 2 months away if I take it on the last day? I'm worried about burning out quickly, but I'm keen to do everything to get into my preferred training program / deanery.
Um, I think it's fine. I think it's definitely okay. I don't necessarily think you would burn out as long as you have a good routine. So, for example, you wake up, you do something, and then you sit for 3 hours, 4 hours, and then you take a 1 hour break, and then you sit for another 4 hours, or 3 hours, and then you're taking another 3 hour break, and then you're sitting for another 2 hours, and then you have every 7 day, you take one day in which you're off. And I would highly recommend to plan that one day. So, for example, to know exactly what you're going to do, which friends you're going to meet, which activities, what you want to eat. And in this way, it would be a very full day, very fulfilled day. And you would be able to rejuvenate yourself. I definitely think that if you have 2 months, especially that it's a very short exam to study for, relatively speaking, if you compare it to some other exams that take us much more time, you have the ability to take those 2 months, and even if you get a bit burned out, it's still not to that degree that you wouldn't score high. I definitely think that you can do it. That's my, again, it depending on how you study and you read them, but I think it's possible, yes.
Yeah, I agree with Dan and Karen. Happy to help. I just think, yeah, the exam is, I guess, of relative importance, but remember just to do nice things and like it's not the be all end all. Did you use PASMA to make sure you were covering all topics, or is there more specific breakdown of topics?
Like I said, every different question bank has some topics that the other ones do not ask, and there's a lot of overlapping between them. This is again my personal preference. I used past medicine, and I felt eventually that it was the main contributor to my preparation. It didn't cover all the topics, but also it depends. You need to think what's your goal, because if you're aiming, I never aim to be number one. Like if you think what's your aim, and my aim is always I'm trying to be realistic about it. I'm not trying to understand 100% or know 100% of the information. I'm trying to know 85 to 90% and to know it 100%. And that way, consistently, I can always score 90%, more or less, 85, 90% of the exam. And in that manner, you know that you're going to get consistent scores all the time. Doesn't matter which day of the exam you're going to take it, because some days would have those questions, the other days would have those questions. I hope it makes sense.
Why eMedica is not recommended, Dan?
I wouldn't say it's not recommended. I have a friend so I'm going to GP training in Cambridge, and one of my best friends also got a place in Cambridge, and he's now there. And I followed his advice, and he actually used eMedica, and he really liked it. eMedica didn't function for me. The way that I am, or my knowledge, I needed something different, and past medicine was just the thing that really talked to me and functioned for me.
Thoughts on using Knowledge Tutor and past medicine?
I found it. I hope that nobody from past medicine is gonna hear me. I found it a waste of time. It's very nitty, like kind of hair splitting, nitty picky, focusing on very specific topics that are very basic and are very interesting, nevertheless wouldn't necessarily show up on the exam, or even if they show up on the exam, they wouldn't necessarily give you the question, right? Because that's the bottom line. You need to have enough information in order to consistently know how to answer the exam, the question in the exam. So for example, I started using the Knowledge Tutor initially, and I remember there was a HACUM question there, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and there was something with like an S2, S1 sound. I can't remember it anymore. And I literally spent 7 hours on breaking that specific fact down and understanding it, and putting like 20 Ankis only on that specific fact. And then in the exam itself, I never needed to know it in order to answer those HACUM questions correctly, because I knew already the answer from the STEM itself. So I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend it. No, you know what? I wouldn't. I think that you can do, in my opinion, you can do a better job with the information which is out there, in whatever form and manner that you want to have your body of knowledge taken from. And you can find that information that you need, rather than letting that knowledge tutor feed you with information that might be or not be relevant for your preparation, given your knowledge, and what you need to know in order to pass that exam, or to score high, or what to answer that correctly. My personal experience.
Thanks, Dan. And to attempt questions, would you recommend being random or by topics?
Wow, that's really good. There's a certain point where you do. So what have I done? I've done random though, because I already, relatively speaking, and again, it doesn't translate to being a good doctor, or not at all, but relatively speaking, I have a very good body of knowledge. I'm coming to this exam because I've done the USMLE, even though it was 4 years ago, step 2, and 7 years ago, step 1. But I didn't feel that I need to go topic-wise in order to be able to answer them. I felt that it's better to do it random, because that way your brain is getting the scenarios that actually gonna be in the test day, and obviously taking them in a random order gonna be much more difficult than already taking them topic-wise. But I've only done that once I've passed about 50% of the exam, the question bank. I haven't done it from the beginning. So there's a certain point where you start understanding, like you do, for example, you have 100 questions from one topic. I've done 50, and then I skip to the other one. And then after I've done 50% in all of them, I kind of flipped it and I started doing random in order to be able to train in it. That being said, certain topics, especially given that I am an IMG, certain topics were extremely weak or from my side, because the way that you do them in Germany, for example, gyno, so OBGYN, the way that you do it in Germany was very different, exam wise and guideline wise, than the way you do it in the UK. And hence I really needed to go throughout that. Like I needed to go through this topic without random order, but just going one question after another in the same topic in order to understand, to orient myself what is even happening here. So you need to assess, if we summarize my answer, then you need to assess what's my level of knowledge. Do I need to go topic wise, or can I just completely scramble it from the beginning, from the middle way? And can I do it to all of the topics together, or is there a certain topic where I have to focus on initially and then I can scramble them? Hope that makes sense.
Thank you all very much for joining us. There's no more questions. I think we should probably time out sign out. But lastly, fortunately, something's happened with my camera. But I want to say just a huge, massive thank you for Dan for giving up your time on a Sunday evening and sharing with us what worked so well for you. And again, congratulations on getting you that GP job as well in Cambridge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My great pleasure being here. I'm really happy to do that. Thank you very much for inviting me and organizing this. It's massive. Like, thank you very much.